So our first speaker is Kamit Tazai, who is a professor at Bar-Ilan University in Tel Aviv. Kamit has done a lot of great research on both theoretical and applied aspects of MPC, so I think is a great speaker to kick off the workshop. So over to you, Kamit.
Thank you, Peter. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So hi, everyone. It's a great pleasure to speak in this workshop, to be the first speaker. Sadly, we can't meet in person, so that's the second best thing. And hi, everyone who wrote me on the chat. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the price of active security in cryptographic protocols. This is a joint work with Mutu and more, and it was also presented in the last year. All right. So this is a workshop on MPC. So let me just give a very brief introduction. Secure multi-party computation is a tool that allows a set of parties to directly communicate while obtaining the same security guarantees as when given access to a trusted party that computes a function. And, oh, sorry, what did I do? Sorry, okay. And specifically, any adversary that corrupts a subset of the parties cannot learn anything beyond the output of the function. And security is proven in the presence of, let's say, two central types of attackers. We have a passive adversary, which is a benign attacker that follows the protocol's instructions while trying to violate privacy. Whereas the strongest and the more realistic attack scenario is an active adversary that just follows an arbitrary attack strategy. We also have another aspect of security where we consider the number of corrupted parties. In the honest majority setting, less than half of the parties may be corrupted, while in the dishonest majority, all parties but one may be corrupted. And working in a dishonest majority setting has the advantage that the party does not need to trust anyone but itself. In this talk, I will focus on the most challenging setting, that is active security in the dishonest majority setting. And by now, we know that MPC is very useful. It has many important applications, and I'm sure we'll hear a lot on this during this workshop. Okay, so a common paradigm in designing MPC protocols is to first start with a protocol that is secure in the passive setting, and then amplify its security to the active setting. And the focus of this talk will be about understanding the overhead of amplifying passive to active security, where specifically we are interested in the cost of communication complexity. So the theoretical goal would be to design compilers that introduce essentially no cost when compiling from passive to active, keeping the same asymptotic efficiency as the underlying passive protocol. And in practice, this goal is translated into requiring very small constant overhead, as small as 2, even less than that. To frame a clean theoretical question, we focus on designing modular protocols where we separate between the computationally expensive cryptographic component from the rest of the protocol by abstracting it as an ideal functionality. Specifically, this abstraction will be consider a secure multiplication. Okay, so we consider basically a protocol for distributed multiplication. And you'll see that this abstraction is very useful because it can capture many different settings, not just the dishonest majority setting. Okay, so more specifically, this is here's a description of this functionality. I'm going to call it fmult. And note that it is parameterized by some secret sharing over some field f, and the parties input their shares of two values a and b, and the functionality produces the shares of the product of these values. So for simplicity, just think of additive secret sharing for the rest of the talk. Okay, so given this abstraction, let me we can rephrase the motivating question as follows, right? Can the overhead of actively secure protocols match the complexity of passively secure protocols given only black box access to fmult? And I mean, we are in particular, we are considering the dishonest majority setting, but you'll see that this applies also to the honest majority setting. And we want to work over an arbitrary size field and with an arbitrary number of parties, like the most generic setting you can think of. So let's overview the state-of-the-art solutions in this domain. So recall that we measure the communication complexity overhead of active over passive. And we count, to calculate that, we count the number of calls to fmult per multiplication gate. So in the two-party setting, this has been achieved theoretically. We're in a recent paper joined with Yuval, Antonio, and Mutu. We show how to reduce this constant into two over large fields using MPC-in-the-Head techniques for some regime of parameters. In the Boolean setting with an arbitrary number of parties, this overhead or the overhead of passive YAO best active YAO over passive YAO is order of S over log C due to using cut and choose techniques. And in the arithmetic setting, where we have an arbitrary number of parties, current techniques or like AMD circuits achieve constant communication overhead over GMW in the OLE hybrid, which is an extension of oblivious transfer for sufficiently large fields. Okay, so given this state of the art, let me phrase our main theorem. Our result shows a compiler that makes a constant number of calls to any passive implementation of fmult per multiplication gate. And in practice, we can show that this constant can be reduced to 2 for large enough finite fields, again, for certain regimes of parameters. Okay, so now I'm going to explain about our techniques. So it would be useful to start with by explaining the details of MPC-in-the-Head and the IPS compiler. This is a powerful technique due to Shai, Prabhakaran, and Sahai, and it was introduced more than a decade ago and was quite influential since then. Their idea was to break the task of achieving active MPC into maybe saying differently, active MPC can be obtained by combining two simpler and weaker building blocks. So on the one hand, we have passive MPC with dishonest majority, and this is also denoted as the inner protocol. And on the other hand, we have active MPC with honest majority, and this is also denoted by the outer or the virtual protocol. And this novel approach broke some barriers when it was introduced, achieving the best asymptotic complexity in our setting, but only for a small number of parties. Also, another point is that while it achieves good asymptotic efficiency, its concrete efficiency or practicality has not been well understood. And extending this approach directly would not work, as I'm going to show you what are the bottlenecks. So pushing the limits of current bottlenecks would require considering a new approach. All right, so let me give you a very high level of how the IPS compiler works. So let's consider the two-party scenario. So we have two parties, P1 and P2, and they emulate an imaginary protocol with honest majority security, while interacting between them using the passive protocol, right? So they interact via an inner protocol and they emulate an outer protocol. And think of this honest majority protocol as a protocol that is carried out by a set of servers. The servers themselves don't have any inputs to introduce to the computation, but they run the actual computation. So this means that the parties must jointly compute the inner computation performed by the servers because they emulate their actions. So if we take a closer look, that implies that the parties maintain additive shares of the state of each server throughout the protocol execution. Good. So additive computations can be performed locally due to the linearity of the secret sharing, while multiplicative operations require communication and are performed using we're calling instantiations of fmult. And of course, the main question is how to ensure that the parties emulated the server's computations correctly, right? Meaning, how do we lift the security of the honest majority into a dishonest majority with active corruptions? So for that, IPS introduced really a beautiful approach called watchlist mechanism, where the idea is that each party basically constantly watching the other party actions, behavior. Basically, this is implemented using oblivious transfer. Each party chooses a subset of servers to be watched. So it basically learns the other part of that server's state. It could verify that the actions were performed correctly. So basically it learns the state and the randomness used for computing fmult. So that's the watchlist mechanism. And one of the main bottlenecks in making IPS practical is related to the number of virtual servers and the watchlist parameters. Okay, this was already observed previously, and it raises the following question of whether we want or can use this mechanism to get practical efficiency. So let me illustrate maybe more precisely the reason for this bottleneck. So there is a tension between the two properties of privacy and correctness with respect to the number of servers that we want to fix for the outer protocol. So specifically, on one hand, we want to ensure a negligible soundness error, say in some statistical parameter S. So that means that the number of servers must be order of S. But on the other hand, the overall number of servers to be watched, right, must be bounded by n/2. Let's say n is the overall number of servers. right? Because the security of that protocol is in the honest majority setting. So we cannot cross n/2. So if we combine these two properties or these two restrictions, constant overhead is only possible for a constant number of parties. Okay, so instead of using or checking the parties' actions throughout the protocol execution, we suggest a new correctness mechanism that pushes the check towards the end of the execution, right before the parties need to reconstruct, reveal the output shares. So what does it mean? It means that we have the parties choose a single set, like they toss a coin and they have a single set where they all of them simultaneously check with respect to the computation throughout, the entire execution. However, this is there are several challenges, serious challenges when applying this approach, because an active adversary can completely break the security of the passive protocol up until the point it needs to be checked, right? So even if you get caught at the end, by the time it get caught, you already stole all the private information of the honest parties. And this is a serious threat that is even true when we amplify the security of the inner protocol, because remember, the outer protocol is only secure against half of the parties being corrupted, and an attacker can cheat in the emulation of more than this number of servers. So this is a real challenge. Another point that is worth mentioning is that so the complexity of the IPS compiler is inherent from the complexity of the outer protocol they plug in. So they use for most of all the instantiations a specific inner protocol, GMW, the passive variant of GMW, and then they replace the outer protocol with different instantiations, and they get different qualitative properties. And in light of all the challenges and what I explained about IPS, the main question is how to choose the building blocks in our compiler. Okay, so so the next observation also is that the amount of work per party must be small. And specifically, keep in mind, for instance, that instantiation based on the Damgard-Ishai 06, which is one of the leading instantiations in IPS, they will not work in our setting or toward achieving our goal, because they support or they use global operations such as degree reduction that are expensive and costly to emulate by the inner protocol. So therefore, in this work, we basically take a dual approach to IPS, where our outer protocol is a tailor-made protocol, which I'm going to describe. Well, we use different instantiations for the inner protocol. That depends also on the F-mult instantiation. That gives us the improved efficiency analysis. So very quickly, towards introducing some more technical details, let me give you a quick recap of Shamir's secret sharing. So to share a secret S, we basically choose a random polynomial P of degree T, where the constant term is equals S. And then we distribute n evaluations of this polynomial, let's say of points between 1 through n. And these are the shares. And there are two very useful security properties of this scheme. First, we have privacy. Viewing up to T evaluations does not reveal anything about the secret. And robustness, meaning changing up to n-T/2 shares does not affect the correctness of reconstructing the secret. And pushing this idea forward, perhaps one of the most influential ideas in scalable MPC is what we call packed secret sharing, where instead of sharing a single secret, we share a block. And this tool allows for a constant amortized overhead where many multiplications can be performed in parallel. Right? We just basically, instead of working on a single secret, we work on a block. You can think of it as an analog maybe tool to SIMD operations in fully homomorphic encryption. Let me just point it. On the other hand, we slightly lose on the parameters where now the degree, instead of being T, it's T plus the block size. All right, so now let me explain a little bit about our compiler. So let's start with the Warmup protocol that is based on the classic BGW result. So remember in BGW, the parties secret share their inputs using Shamir scheme. And then following gate by gate paradigm, they basically compute addition gates locally. I mean, due to the linearity of Shamir scheme. And for multiplication, they multiply their shares, but then they need to run some degree reduction procedure, which requires communication. In contrast to this column of passive BGW, we will consider a slightly different variant. Specifically, we'll be working with two layers of shares. Where, I mean, the first layer will be Shamir sharing. And then on top of it, we will have additive sharing. So think of every Shamir share being additively shared among the parties. So what does it mean? It means that when the parties want to perform multiplication, that will require communication because they have to compute the cross products. However, they will be able to run global operations like degree reduction locally, because basically working with two layers of sharing means that the parties have, they share a global view of the execution. And since operations like degree reduction is a linear procedure, they will be able to perform it locally. Okay, so the steps of our protocol, or the Warmup protocol. So in the first phase, the parties secret share their inputs using the two layers of sharing, as I mentioned before. So they start with Shamir shares, and then each of these shares is additively shared. So I will use the bracket notation to denote the additive sharing of the Shamir share. Now, still, when they want to compute addition gates, right, they can do it locally. I mean, the same invariant is maintained, right? Because basically, if they add the shares locally, they get the additive shares of the Shamir shares of the output of this gate, basically. So that's still the same. Now, the difference is with respect to multiplication gates. Here, they need to communicate. So specifically, they will communicate using fmult. Okay, this functionality allows to compute the cross products of the input shares. And after computing the shares of the output, they will basically run degree reduction locally. Okay, I mean, using the techniques we know of, using FFTs, reconstructing the polynomial and then resharing it. But that is done locally on the additive shares of the global view of each party. So let me go back to the table that I described before. That description didn't take into account any active attacks. And to protect against active behavior, we need to test the parties' computations in order to enforce correct behavior. And we will basically have a different test for every phase in the protocol. So let me, I'm doing the time. Let me describe one or two tests. So I want to start with the basic, what we call a degree test, which was considered previously in the literature, for instance, in Dangar-Desai 06, in the Ligero system, in other papers. And the goal in this test is to make sure that a polynomial, or let's say a secret, was shared correctly using the polynomial of the right degree. Okay. And we also want to have a single test. I mean, we want to check all the shares together. We want to have an amortized test. The complexity is amortized over all the shares. So how is it done? You basically, the idea is to view each set of shares of a polynomial, let's say of degree t, as a vector. Recall that each party has the share of this view of this matrix, right? So we have many vectors for as many as polynomials we have in the protocol, and here we want to check, for instance, the input sharing and also the outcomes of the degree reduction. Okay, so so the parties choose randomness, and this randomness, I mean, they just can do some coin tossing, and we can also use, I mean, for practical instantiations, we can also use unconditional PRGs that are resilient against linear attacks. And combining all this, this linear combination, we also add a blinding vector, so to get privacy. And I want to note, I mean, this is a random sharing of polynomial of the right degree. And this could be released to the parties, so so they can actually reconstruct W and test that this is of the right degree. So that's basically the what we call the degree test. And here soundness error is 1 over field size. Okay, so let me show you. I have time. Let me show you another test of enforcing correctness. And this is this test is what we call equality test. It's also used in previous literature. And basically, recall what happens in the protocol. The parties they communicate to perform to compute the multiplication, and then they do a local degree reduction. And we want to make sure that the outcome of the degree reduction is consistent with the share with the secret that was shared before we did the degree reduction. Okay, so we want to check for consistency. So in particular, we want to check that, the secret before and after for a 2t degree and a t degree polynomials is consistent, it's the same. So how do you do that? You basically match pairs of vector of shares, and you compute the difference between the sharing. Now, if this is if the same secret was shared in both polynomials, then the difference will give us the zero share. So now, as before, we are going to take the linear combination of all these matched pairs, and we will add a blinding polynomial. And let me just say that here, the blinding polynomial is not just a random polynomial of the right degree. Here, the secret that is embedded within this polynomial equals 0, right? Because the test passes only if the secrets are eliminated. So we don't want the blinding polynomial to mess up with our check. So here Z again is a blinding factor of not just a random polynomial, but the polynomial that correspond to the 0 secret. So after matching the pairs and blinding the linear combination, the outcome is revealed. Again, the parties reconstruct W and check that the secret corresponds to 0. Okay, so these were 2 tests that we were using in our protocol. And let me go back to the previous table that sort of represented the phases that we had eye level and all the tests. So as I mentioned before, this was just a warm-up protocol. The reason is because so far we didn't gain anything, because still the complexity is inflated by some statistical parameter. I mean, more specifically, if we want to measure the communication complexity of our protocol, it's going to be S times the communication of the passive protocol. And the reason is because we need to replicate every gate S times if we want to get a small statistical error. Okay, this is similarly to an analysis of cut and choose. So far we didn't gain anything. How are we going to get to obtain?
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Isn't there always also a loss? I mean, compared to a standard Shamir-based secret sharing-based protocol, just because of the 2 layers of shares?
No, why?
Well, because everybody I mean, if I was doing ordinary Shamir-based secret sharing, I would have 1 share of every secret. And now I have...
saying in the Warmup protocol, I mean, you're losing because of using 2 layers of shares?
Yeah.
That's what you're saying? Yeah. It could be. This is just I mean...
You have more shares, clearly, I mean.
Yes. It could be the case. This is just as a sort of a game.
Oh, yeah, right.
Definitely. For sure, it doesn't give us what we want. In order to get what you want, the constant communication overhead, this is where we embed the packed secret sharing. And now things amortize nicely because basically we compute many multiplications together. So we pay this overhead of replicating gates to get to reduce the error, but then we also make sure that we do multiple operations in parallel. So this is where it amortizes. Right. So introducing, or using packed secret sharing doesn't come for free, because now we need to make sure in the protocol that the blocks are rearranged nicely or correctly between layers. So we do, let's say we multiply, we compute many multiplications per the first layer together. And now we get the output, which is also the block of the results of the multiplication. But this is not aligned correctly with the replication or the permutation introduced by the circuit. Right. So basically, the parties need to rearrange the secrets towards entering the next layer. And this requires another test, which I can very briefly explain. Doing the repacking and testing, we call it permutation test. So this is how it works. Okay, so let's say we have two blocks of secrets where we want to test consistency. Let's say we want to make sure that all the red values are equal and all the purple values equal. So the first step would be to write all these constraints as a set of linear constraints. The second step, well, we want to amortize this test by taking the linear combination of all these equations as before. And finally, we will do that by bringing this set of equations into a format of an inner product, where we have the values, the secret values that are, are secret and we want to test them, and the public randomness, which is generated by the parties. And this is public because also the replication pattern of the circuit is known. So taking this linear combination, again, we need to add a blinding block, okay? In this test, the blinding block is defined with respect to a set of secrets that sums to 0, because the test will check that once we reveal W as before and reconstruct the secrets, again, the parties are going to check that the sum of all secrets sums to 0. So always the blinding vector or polynomial would have to have this feature, so it will not will make the test passes. So that's a permutation test, and incorporating packed secret sharing now will enable to eliminate the factor S in the communication complexity, because again, the overhead amortizes over a block of multiplications. Good. So I don't have too much time. Okay, but I don't have too much to say.
Quick question.
Yes.
Is this all for a large field or for any size field so far?
For any field, because you run the test only once, so you can basically, you can repeat it as many times as you need. If you want to reduce, if the field is small, so you can, if you want to reduce the soundness error. This is just an additive term in the complexity.
Great.
Okay, so the last thing I want to say, my final point, I want to explain about the security properties of realizing F-mult. Obviously, we want as weaker as security as possible because, I mean, for realizing F-mult, because it affects the efficiency of our protocol. So I want to say that the first observation we had is that using a protocol that is private against active adversary is already sufficient because I mean the simulator can extract the inputs of the parties from the first phase. But I want to say that we can even sort of weaken or maybe abstract this security property in the following sense. We can only use a defensively private protocol. This is sufficient for our properties because it's basically we have in this notion of security, the adversary can, if the adversary can provide sort of a proof that includes the input and randomness of what has been used in the protocol, then basically security is reduced to passive security. So this proof is sort of a defense of an adversary. And it is used to ensure, in the security proof, it is used to ensure a correct behavior. So defensible privacy is basically a concept that has been shown in the literature. It could be achieved based on semi-honest plus coin tossing. But basically the idea is to it's sufficient to ensure that the semi-honest adversary used correctly sampled coins correctly in the protocol. So if we have a proof that shows that, then the protocol is secure. So so the second observation we had when we were writing this the proof is that since defensible privacy can be achieved by semi-honest plus coin tossing, we can basically have a separated consistency check I mean, at the beginning that is separated from our second consistency check that chooses the subset of servers. And here we basically reduce the F-mult instantiation to a random instance, like when we choose random triples. And when we reduce to that to this instance, we don't need to make sure that all the random instances are correct, like it is required in other work. We can even tolerate up to, let's say, k errors, because this will be caught later in the second consistency check. So basically, all in all, what I'm trying to say is that it is sufficient to use a semi-honest or passive implementation for F-mult and having one extra consistency check to make sure that the randomness was used, was sampled and used correctly. This will give us defensible private or privacy, and from the defense or the proof, we can actually extract the inputs. So that was the last comment regarding the instantiation of F-mult. And let me just conclude with some open problems. So perhaps the biggest open problem is understanding the concrete constant, the concrete efficiency for small fields. for binary fields. This is not yet understood at all. Current protocols are using AG codes, so requires understanding either the complexity of these codes or design new codes. This is a very important question. Second, can we push our approach to achieve adaptive security, for instance, if we're plugging adaptively secure fmult? Also, can we get constant round with constant overhead in the FOT hybrid? I mean, using oblivious transfer. Right now, we can only get it using OLE by viewing the the distributed garbling functionality as an arithmetic computation. And finally, that's true always, we need more compilers with different features that will sort of allow us to get more concretely efficient protocols. That's it. That concludes my talk. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Kamit. That was a great talk. So first off from the Q&A, Dragos has a question about, is there any chance to extend some of these techniques to work over the ring setting instead of fields?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you can. So I mean, we need to adjust if we have the right instantiations for fmult and the tests. I think some of this is already out there in the literature. Yeah. So I think it is possible.
Okay.
Peter, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Kamit, great talk.
Yes.
In comparison to the CGH18 paper, the Lindor one, where you have the extra MAC that you put on the thing, and then you do 2 multiplications.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so in their paper, they only look at for the honest majority setting, but this is
Right.
you had
But not only that, they need a large field.
okay, yeah, but you could extend it also to
Yes.
to the dishonest majority setting.
Exactly.
But for large finite fields, does your method have any benefit over theirs? For large
I
finite,
mean, concretely, that's a very good question. I don't know. We didn't implement it yet, so I don't know about the concrete parameters.
because concretely, their thing's really simple. Yeah, you just
Is
Yes.
there a version of their protocol which works for dishonest majority?
No, we actually checked that with the, no, because the additive, I mean, they assume that the passive protocol is secure, is resilient against additive attacks.
Mm-hmm.
The kind of additive attacks they abstract in their paper is something weaker than what you would need in dishonest majority. So it's not, it's I mean,
okay.
it's not extendable in a straightforward way.
Okay, thank you.